Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. Today, I'm digging into vegetable oils and how they actually create trans fats and have created this false fear of saturated fats or naturally occurring saturated fats, and explain why these two have been confused, not only in our research, but in health risks. So let's just jump right in here. Now, these vegetable oils, often called the hateful eight. So there's soy, canola, cottonseed, corn oil, safflower, sunflower, grapeseed, and rice bran oil. Those are the main ones, the biggest ones. The biggest ones really being soy and canola. But these were originally industrial products, like cottonseed oil, originally an industrial product made by Procter and Gamble, for like a lubricant, for a machine lubricant. Okay, and I thought, hey, let's get this into how do we sell more of this stuff? We're producing tons of it. Soybean oil hit the market in probably 1910. Cottonseed was right around the same time as well. And so these oils were sort of remarketed or reimagined, if you will, into food products, as a replacement for saturated animal fat in cooking. It was an easy, convenient, and then they had to sell it as a healthful product. And then it moved its way into processed food ingredient for stability, shelf stability, for consistency, and in those products without using animal fats, because they're cheaper. They're cheaper. But as you'll find, they had to stabilize them so they wouldn't go rancid. And that's what we're going to get into. Soybean oil, as I mentioned, is the most consumed. It's about 78%, give or take, 75 to 80% of all vegetable fats consumed in the US, followed by canola oil. But we still eat 5 times more soybean oil than canola oil. And you think, well, when do I eat soybean oil? You do. It's in processed food. That's when the US general consumer eats it, or when they go to restaurants, because that's what they use almost exclusively. And the supposed benefit to it being is that it's a Pufa, right? It's a polyunsaturated fatty acid, polyunsaturated fat. But in reality, that's actually the biggest drawback. It's its biggest pitfall, because it opens it up to being oxidized. So saturated fats, or being unsaturated, allows them, as I said, be more oxidized, more easily oxidized, and inflammatory, and actually be converted. It starts converting into trans fats, and then intentionally converted to trans fats for that shelf stability. And we all know about trans fats, right? We've all heard. I mean, there's a few outliers, but for the most part, between U.S. government, progressive health authorities, even academia, trans fats are not ideal. They're bad. Even people who are proponents of soy and soybean oil and vegetable oil, they know it's a shame that they will even say it's a shame that most of their product ends up being hydrogenated in processed food. So it's hydrogenated and then turned into trans fats, and these trans fats are just harmful. These oils are connected to kidney and liver problems, liver gene dysregulation, heart disease, stroke, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, cancer. And we're gonna unpack some of that. 99%, give or take, or about 95%, excuse me, 95% of all soy is genetically modified. And it's about the same for corn and canola as well. It's right around the 85, 90, 95% mark for each of those. And all PUFA, all polyunsaturated fatty acids, are going to have trans fats. And that's because, again, when they're unsaturated, there's these open bonds. Okay. There's double bonds formed, and then they're supposed to have a hydrogen atom on either side of the carbon. Okay. So it's kind of like a chain. And so with the polyunsaturated fat, there are places where the hydrogen isn't there, and you've just got double bonds for the carbons. So I'm going to explain why that's important in just a few minutes. But that is part of, whereas a saturated fat has no open spots for hydrogen. It's got a hydrogen paired on either side of the carbon. Monounsaturated only has one open hydrogen spot, so it's less vulnerable to oxidation and a little more stable than a polyunsaturated fat, which have several openings. But this is what stabilizes. Okay, causes the fat to be stable when it has fewer openings. So if you read the label on almost any processed food, so it could be bread, soup, salad dressing, kind of breakfast bar, cereal, healthy or not, considered healthy, labeled healthy or not, it's going to have some hydrogenated oil in there, or it might say partially hydrogenated. Same thing, they didn't completely hydrogenate it, but it's partially hydrogenated. That's part of making it more saturated. So they're taking this Pufa, which is supposedly good for us because it's a Pufa, and they're making it more saturated through processing, essentially through a process, man-made process, to stabilize it. And as I mentioned, the hydrogen pairs on either side of the carbon. So it's kind of, think of like the carbon in the middle and hydrogen going out each side, kind of like wheels. Okay, like you'd have wheels on either side, and along this chain looks like little wheels outside of a carbon, right? So that's considered a cis formation, or the original formation, CIS, cis. You probably heard that term recently in the news, but cis formation, it's the original formation with those double bonds on either side. So what they do is they move a hydrogen atom to the other side. So you have two hydrogen atoms on the same side of the carbon. Okay. And that creates what's called the trans formation. Not trans in and of itself, it's called a trans fat formation. And so they don't do it to every double bond that's open. So it's partially hydrogenated, but it's still a hydrogenation process. And it just has the same effect. The fatty acid goes from being very flexible, more flexible and movable, to kind of stiff and rigid. And which is one of the things that creates the health risks with these oils. Our cell membranes are made up of fat and cholesterol, really. Most of it being saturated fat and monounsaturated fat, but saturated fat and cholesterol. And so both saturated and naturally mono and polyunsaturated fats are actually, the polyunsaturated fats being the least naturally occurring in our system. So we have saturated and mono being the greatest. Just to make that clear, there are some polyunsaturated fats that are naturally occurring, but they're the smaller amount, like 2 to 4% of our natural. What's supposed to be. It's what we're born with, and what we would be if we ate the proper diet. What's happening with all these extra polyunsaturated fats in our diet, all these vegetable oils, is that fat ratio of polyunsaturated fats in our system is gone up from what it should be 2 to 4% up closer to 20, 25%. Not ideal. Not ideal. That's not the way we would normally be functioning with the amount of fats in our system, because we need certain fats for certain functions and efficiency, structure, hormone production, vitamin and mineral transport, okay, as well as these cell membranes and other structure. But the problem is our bodies can't distinguish between naturally occurring saturated fats that we're supposed to have and these trans fats in the transport. So they're taken up and used for cell structure or brain structure. Our brain is 60% fat, and 25% of the body's cholesterol is actually in the brain. I think the brain is like 15% cholesterol. So, but 60% fat. And again, hormone production and so forth. But anyway, these stiff, kind of rigid trans fats get in the cell membrane and actually inhibit function. Stiffening the membrane inhibits the natural cell function of what's supposed to happen with that membrane, letting nutrients go in and out, okay? Detoxifying the cell, cellular respiration. So we also have, it's again studied in the more progressive health circles that plant sterols are really not a good substitute for cholesterol, animal cholesterol. in cellular function. We have lipid rafts that sit on our cells that hold our insulin receptors place. And so when we have plant sterols, that really disrupts the function of our insulin receptors. So you can see how that would lead to some level of insulin resistance, some dysfunction in those lipid rafts in the insulin receptor. So this is going to affect having the wrong kind of fat in our cellular membranes is going to create dysfunction all over our bodies, right? Because we're put together by cells, right? Every kind of cell. This, again, it's going to affect, as I mentioned, nutrient absorption. So we have fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, which are all fat soluble, as well as fat soluble minerals. The hormone signaling. So we make all of our cortisol, testosterone, progesterone, all of our sex hormones, estrogen from cholesterol, fats, right? Vitamin D as well, immune function, and eliminating those toxins. So in this process, to make the fat more saturated or more stable, it does transport better as for commercially, right? As far as keeping food stable, sitting in warehouses, sitting on the shelf. But it's causing dysfunction in our bodies. And you don't see, there's a reason you don't see soy oil in bottles for consumers to cook with. You may go to some odd health food store that might have some cold pressed soybean oil, but most of it is not in that state. Not about 95% of it isn't. And you're not going to buy soybean oil because most of it's hydrogenated. So it'd be a lot of trans fats, and they have to label those now, but it could be almost solid because a lot of the hydrogenation really makes it almost more solid or more thick. Okay. It's really used as ingredients in processed food, as I mentioned, or again, and cooking oil in the majority of restaurants. They're using soybean oil. There's a lot. McDonald's used to fry their French fries in tallow. A lot of movie theaters used to use coconut oil to make popcorn. That's been replaced with these vegetable oil, some type of vegetable oil, more often than not, soybean oil, because it's the cheapest. Now, you may have heard about these aldehydes that are formed or being produced by the cooking oil in restaurants. They have to use special cleaners, so it creates this product called the aldehyde, and it gets into it vapors up from the oil and actually gets stuck to the walls, the ceiling, the equipment. They have to use these special cleaners to remove this from the walls and the equipment. And there's actually stories of cases of spontaneous combustion of the staff uniforms that are being sent out to be cleaned, like in the dryer. When they're getting dry in the heat, they spontaneously combust. It's from this aldehyde buildup on these uniforms. So imagine breathing that, eating that, putting in your body. It's highly inflammatory, highly unstable chemical. And we're frying it into our food. So the heat in the oil really stirs up these aldehydes, creates these aldehydes. It creates a toxic chemical that we're ingesting. So it's no wonder it creates this inflammatory response in our systems, in our gut, in our cells. So I think there's mention of that. If you want to hear more about that, and The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Tickles, that's a great one. If you want to learn more about fat, get into The Big Fat Surprise. Yeah, Nina Tickles is brilliant. Now, these formation of these trans fats just happens in the processing of these. So as they use the hexane, the heat, and the steam, and all that to create these soybean oil, or all the vegetable oils, remove them from the original seed or bean, wherever they're coming from, because they're polyunsaturated, they tend to go rancid quickly. Now, again, removed from their original plant. So these oils are much more stable, or fats are more stable in their original form. So if you got the oils in a nut, like a walnut, okay, or an almond, or actually still in the bean, yeah, they're not going to go rancid. But when we start removing them, and especially in these processes, they're not treated as well as olive oil is, cold pressed and all that, or avocado oil. They're not treated as gingerly, as delicately. Um, it's a huge processing because it's mass production on this stuff, and this begins to, they just start going rancid immediately and there's some formation of these trans fats anyway, but then they increase that to again make them more stable chemically intentionally. Um, so again, it's just the open spots for in those double bonds, like I mentioned, allow for the oxidation occurs because free radicals come, try to steal an electron, and just get oxidation going on, essentially rust, right, or age. And then we have that going when we eat these. That's going on in our body, so it creates this free radical cascade in our body, in our gut, in our cells. And the saturated fats, again, have no open bonds. Monounsaturated has only one open bond. So they're much more resistant to this oxidation and this free radical creation. Now, polyunsaturated is supposed to be good for us because of the omega-3s, right? We need our omega-3s. Most of these are really omega-6 dominant. They might have a 6-to-1 to, maybe 20-to-1. It's anywhere from 5 to 10 at least. Ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. So 5 to 6 to 10 times more omega-6s than 3s. So they're not omega-3 dominant. But a lot of these, and omega-6s are more inflammatory, right? Omega-3 is anti-inflammatory. That's why it's supposed to be good for us. And we get way too much omega-6 compared to omega-3. Our ratios are off in our diet generally. But this omega-3 gets destroyed in the processing. It just gets from the heat, the hexane, the deodorizing they have to use because of the rancid smell and taste. All that really ruins this omega-3. It destroys it. So most of it isn't, remaining afterwards. And then they're hydrogenated in this process as well. So they actually, omega-3s are hydrogenated 15 to 20 times faster than omega-6s. So we're losing any benefit from omega-3 if there really is any, which I'll get to. But again, you remove it from its whole food, it's going to start oxidizing much quicker. That's why you need to stick to whole food sources of omega-3, the ideal being fish. So that's really your best source. Some kind of fish, sardines, oysters, whatever. And so now, generally speaking, fats are not all one type of fat. Like it's not all saturated, all monounsaturated, all polyunsaturated. It's a blend. Whatever it has most of determines what we call it based on its consistency and that ratio of the types of fat it has. But they're a blend of saturated, mono, and poly for the most part. Monounsaturated that we know, the most famous one, of course, is olive oil, followed by avocado oil. And they're about 78 to 80% monounsaturated, right? Soy is about 23% monounsaturated. Okay, some benefit there, right? Maybe canola is 56, kind of high. Beef tallow, right? The evil saturated fat of beef tallow is about 48% monounsaturated. So twice as much as soybean oil. Lard is 44%, again, about twice as much as soybean oil. Butter is about 30% monounsaturated. So all these evil saturated fats are actually full of monounsaturated fats as well. Okay, and polyunsaturated. They have some polyunsaturated, but they're not 80, 90% saturated. Now, coconut oil does have a lot of saturated fat. Actually, a lot of very beneficial medium chain triglycerides in there, medium chain saturated fat that are really good. So that doesn't take it off the list as being healthy or being better for us than these polys at all. If anything, it makes it more stable and heat resistant. But there's better sources. My point is there's better sources of monounsaturated fat without the risk of the trans fats and the oxidation. Now, saturated fat, the evil saturated fat, soybean oil is about 14 to 15% saturated fat. Now, soybean is not really a low fat food. It's about 40% fat. So, I mean, if we're worried about fat or a low fat diet, soy is not, originally. It has to be highly processed to start removing all these, the protein over here, the fat over there. And that's 15% before hydrogenation. Once they start hydrogenating that soybean oil, it becomes trans fat. It can be 40, 45% trans fat. Sometimes 30 to 40. The jury's out. It depends on who you're asking, who's doing the testing. Now, Pufas, because of this, okay, not Pufas again in your nut or in your fish, but these Pufa oils are linked to an increased risk of cancer, heart disease. And I'm going to link to some of these studies and articles in the show notes. So you can, if you really want to dig into that, you can get a closer look at the sources, look at their methods. But again, this is not referring to whole food polyunsaturated fats. Okay. This is extracted saturated fats, oil form, put in a processed food. Okay. Because again, they become oxidized, inflammatory. So the early studies, I'm sure we've all heard about them since the 70s, if not earlier, showing, saturated fats as the ones causing heart disease, didn't actually separate out or delineate between trans fats and naturally occurring saturated animal fats, like the difference between margarine and butter. They just included it all together in their study. Oh, they have margarine, butter. Yeah, same thing. Okay. Oh, look, higher risk of disease. Do you see the problem with that? So you're using lard, or you're using cottonseed oil and Crisco, right? Treat them the same way, even though they're really not the same. So the recent meta-analysis kind of accounting for these differences and separating those out really doesn't implicate the naturally occurring saturated fat for heart disease or diabetes at all. There's plenty of those. I've posted about them. There's no reason for these warnings about saturated fat or animal fat, these naturally occurring saturated fats. It's the trans that's causing the problem. I mean, even Ansel Keys' early studies, where he was trying to demonize butter as this fat source causing heart disease, he was actually using margarine. And margarine is either trans fat, right, hydrogenated fat, corn oil, and now more like soybean oil recently, but I think originally it was corn oil. Now, some people will argue there's naturally occurring trans fats in beef and other animal fat. The thing is, ruminants like beef, sheep, those and they convert their trans fats, the grass are eating, into a trans fat called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which is actually sold as a supplement as a benefit. Some people found some benefit to supplementing with a CLA. And they argue that it's actually good for you. So it's not like one thing's for sure, it's not like the other trans fats. Okay. I'm still not a big fan of taking polyunsaturated fats in a pill form. I'm just not sure. I don't see the need for it. And I think they all go rancid. Now it's a trans fat. So you have to decide for yourself if you think you need CLA or if you want to supplement with CLA. I'm not making a recommendation on it. But it's certainly not harmful like your typical processed trans fats, that the harm has not been shown. Whereas trans fats, that certainly has. And if we look at the onset of lifestyle diseases since the 1900s, most of us know sugar consumption has increased dramatically, right? 10 times at least. But there was also the invention of cooking oils. Again, Crisco with the cottonseed oil, soybean oil, the corn oil. Canola was created from rapeseed. I'll get back to that in a minute. But soybean oil consumption has increased by 1,000% during the 20th century, like from 1910 to 1999. 1,000% increase. You think that correlates with our current level of metabolic disease? Again, these shortenings, these margarines, they can be as much as 45% trans fat, or shortenings, I think, was 35% trans fat. don't know if some of you are old enough to remember that commercial, that little, the margarine that says, "Para qué?" Guy left a little lid, "Para qué?" as a healthy alternative to butter. It's a package of 45% trans fats, very fats, which we really need to stay away from. Stick with butter and you're a whole lot healthier. The original, right, fat that we use for cooking, fat that more than 200 years ago and back, it was used for cooking. It was either lard, animal fat, butter, right? So stick with what's worked for us for thousands of years, ideally, not these current inventions, these current modern fats and cooking oils. Canola is again made from rapeseed. There's an acid in rapeseed called the rancid acid. Now they've bred canola, which is essentially rapeseed, but it's a low rancid acid rapeseed. So it's just a breed of rapeseed that has less rancid acid. Okay, but it's that rancid acid is linked to a heart disease called Keshan disease, which basically creates lesions on the heart. So not ideal, not a heart friend. Yes, it's supposed to have all the omega-3s. It's supposed to be heart healthy, but it's got some this rancid acid that is linked to heart disease, as well as some other kidney and liver problems associated with canola oil. Now, the American Dietetics Association say that canola oil can be as high as 40% hydrogenated in certain foods. And that's, of course, trans fats. So here we get the kidney, the liver problems coming from that, as well as not to mention trans fats just being, bad for your gut. But again, remember that high omega-3 content, a lot of it is destroyed in the processing. So the heat, the hexane, the deodorizers. Now, a lot of the omega-3 that's in there is actually ALA. That's a form of omega-3 that's ALA. It's in flax, it's in chia. The thing is, what most of us want for the recommended type of omega-3s that we actually use, that our brain uses, which is the purpose of these omega-3s from fish, is called DH. There are two kinds, DHA and EPA. Okay. And so what's in flax, chia, canola is ALA. So if you're able to convert ALA to EPA and DHA, not everyone can, but if you can, it's a single digit percentage. It's less than 10%, like 5 to 8, depending on which one it is. So one of them is like below 5, depending on which one. I think one of them is harder to convert than the other. The point is, you get, of all the ALA, you're getting less than 10% converted to what you need. That's why I said, just eat some fish, because that's where you're going to get it. There is grass-fed beef has some omega-3 that is more easily converted, like on a 30% level to EPA and DHA, but that's not the reason to eat grass-fed. I mean, if you're avoiding the polyunsaturated, the omega-6s, yes. Okay, to avoid omega-6s, eat grass-fed. It's a better treated animal for sure. But if you don't do it just as your only source, unless you're just allergic to fish, then that's maybe your next best option is a grass-fed beef. But it's your best bet is fish. Get some sardines, get some oysters, get something like that in your diet. American, now you understand these recommendations, conflicting recommendations. Why are we being told that we should be eating this canola or these chia and avoid, beef, even though it's, understand that, like the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, okay, the one driven by basically our making nutrition guidelines, USDA, the ADA, American Dietetics Association, or it's called the Nutrition Academy now, who certifies our nutritionists, creates the education for them. But the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition is sponsored by companies such as General Foods, General Mills, Nabisco, Quaker Oats, which is owned by Pepsi, okay, ConAgra. Gotcha. These guys, again, they sponsor the Nutrition Academy as well. DuPont, DuPont. What's DuPont known for? Chemicals, oils, right? Industrial stuff. They're one of the biggest producers of soybean oil in the world. They own several very healthily labeled soy milk companies and soy food companies. So a lot of the soy milk, soy food, some of those products you're going to see in your grocery store and health food store, they're owned by DuPont, brought to you by DuPont. DuPont, what you think of when you think of health food or someone who's concerned about the consumer health? They consumer health advocates over there at DuPont? I don't know. I might question that one. So if you're not convinced yet, just wait, there's more. Soy in general, but soybean oil specifically can cause gut inflammation. So leaky gut through the lectins, the phytates, these anti-nutrients that cause inflammation and really causing space in those junctions, and then food particles get through those space in the junctions of the gut into your system, which creates inflammation, immune response, and can lead to like an autoimmune response or autoimmune disease, certain foods. So yeah, leaky gut, definitely a side effect. There's a study published in Endocrinology, the magazine, the journal Endocrinology, which again, I'm linking to this. Soybean oil is more obesogenic and diabetogenic than coconut oil and fructose in mouse. Potential role for the liver in this dysfunction, but that's the title, long title. So there's actually genetic changes from soybean oil to the hypothalamus. That's in your brain, guys. Okay. It helps regulate metabolism and hunger. But it actually affected the regulation of oxytocin. So that's like called the love drug that we elicit from our hypothalamus. But yeah, genetic changes, genes, changes to your genes in your hypothalamus, in your brain, which also increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. Okay. Also a dysregulation of liver genes, which would affect detoxification as well as hormone regulations. If you know anything about your liver regulates your blood sugar. It's where insulin resistance often starts. We get fatty liver. We start having all sorts of hormonal problems with metabolic hormones, not sex hormones, metabolic hormones affected by the liver. So hunger hormones, mostly insulin and everything related to how well you store fat, how often whether you're allowed to burn fat. So the insulin glucagon relationship there, definitely affected by any problems with the liver. But yeah, dysregulation of liver genes. And there were other genes involved. It said, I'm going to take a quote from it. Other genes involved in obesity, diabetes, inflammation, mitochondrial function, and cancer were also upregulated by the soybean oil diet. So there's a couple studies. I've got articles too here about. One was had two diets of soybean oil, two different soybean oil diets, and one coconut oil diet. The two soybean oil diets had different responses. They were slightly different, but they had similar responses. So same type of changes, just in different degree. The coconut oil had no changes to the hypothalamus, no changes in liver dysregulation. Then there was a second study with soybean oil, coconut oil, and the one was high fructose. And just high fructose. And soybean oil had the greatest impact on the obesogenic and insulin diabetogenic, effects, more so than the high fructose diet. Coconut oil had almost no effect, little to no effect on either of those. Soybean oil beat the high fructose diet. So I know we're talking sugar, and I'm the first to say sugar, get rid of the fructose, right? I'm also saying get rid of the soybean. We have both of them. There's not one or the other. People are fighting back and forth. Which ones? They're both bad guys. Fructose, vegetable oils, particular soybean oil, because that's one most consumed. It seems to have the greatest impact that we're seeing. Avoid them. Read the labels. Avoid these vegetable oils. It says hydrogenated. Stay away from it. It's one of the hateful eight I mentioned. Stay away from it. And you can find it again. Bread. Any commercially made bread, it's going to be there. If you got to buy bread, go to the bakery, even in a grocery store bakery, and you're going to find some like a brioche type loaf or maybe a sourdough that hopefully doesn't have those oils in it. I know I found there's the brioche loaf, they'll have it listed. Everything, even in the bakery, they should have the label with what goes in it. And there may be some stuff you don't know what it is, but at least it won't be soybean oil. So that's one way. If you have to have bread, go that route. At least get rid of one variable you don't want. Any chips you eat are going to be fried in this oil, whether it's organic or not, organic canola oil, organic soybean oil, whatever. It's still polyunsaturated. It's still, really easily oxidized and easily going rancid. And it's probably been hydrogenated in there. If not in their processing early on, in the heat it took in the frying, that hydrogenate that creates trans just from the heat, because it's unstable. Make your own salad dressing by all means at home. Don't buy it in the store. Get some olive oil, some vinegar, season it, salt, make your own. Because most of those salad dressings you buy in the store say olive oil on the front, they may have a little something that looks healthy and some, actor's face on it. Who knows? If you look at the label, it may have some olive oil, but it's also going to have one or two others as well. One of these that I've mentioned. Cook with anything except a Pufa oil. And if any of you are still buying cooking oils in the store, please stop. It's horrible. They're horrible. Olive oil, avocado oil, both of those are monounsaturated, so they're resistant. Coconut oil, lard, for goodness sake, get some lard. It's stable. Tallow, butter, ghee. And just remember, all the restaurants use these cooking oils, most of them being soybean oil. So anything fried or sauteed in a restaurant, it's got these oils cooked right into it. So avoid fried food in restaurants as much as you can. Just get your steak, get your steamed veggie. If you're gonna have a salad, get those little those little bottles of olive oil and vinegar they'll bring to your table, and just make your own on there with some salt and pepper. But you'll notice it if once you've gotten away from these enough, you've removed them from your diet, when you do actually have them, like in a restaurant, you'll get that stomach burning or your bloat. You'll have a couple bites of somebody's fries or something just because you're feeling it. You feel like having some. And then you get this burning sensation in your stomach, or a sudden bloat from eating something. Well, what did I eat? Something was fried in these oils. You're going to blame the salt, and maybe some extra sodium is put in there that, might cause a little bit of water retention. But if you're feeling the pressure and bloat and burn in your stomach, it's probably from these oils causing inflammation in your gut. So just be sensitive, be aware of how you feel after you eat certain places or what you're eating there. So these oils are pervasive, and you have to be extra diligent to avoid them, or at least to try to limit your exposure to them. It's almost, unless you're truly growing your own food or buying stuff from a farm and having real basic, just meat and eggs and some, maybe some dairy and some vegetables from a garden that you're, preparing yourself. If you do that, fruit, if you eat that, anything processed from a bag, packaged, box, whatever, it's going to have these. So limit your exposure as much as possible, and nourish your body with the type of fats it needs for the cell structure, the hormone regulation and production, nutrient transport, and energy. But understand, fat is not just calories. It's not just energy. It's not determines whether you gain fat, lose fat. It's not just ketones. The type of fat you eat matters. And we actually get far more energy and more ATP produced from our mitochondria by monounsaturated and saturated fat than by polyunsaturated fat. Polyunsaturated fat is like 30 to 40% of the energy compared to a saturated or monounsaturated fat. So we get less energy from it. We get greater risk of inflammation. That's why we really only have 3-4% in our bodies at birth. Okay. And if you're eating a good diet, that's where it stays. But these fats are becoming so pervasive that it's actually increasing, as I mentioned early on, the amount of polyunsaturated fat being stored in our cells, in our bodies. And it's throwing off, it's affecting our health. It's creating inflammation because they're more susceptible to inflammation and oxidation. And a lot of them already oxidized coming in. Oxidized LDL is the culprit right now in heart disease, not just general LDL, not just light, fluffy LDL. It's triglyceride laden LDL, excuse me. And the stuff that gets oxidized, whether it's oxidized before we eat it or once it gets in our bodies from, sugar, these free radicals, whatever. we need to avoid these fats because they're unstable. Okay. Again, whole food sources. If you have some nuts, great. Keep in the nuts. Eat the fish. But you don't need to supplement with it. And you certainly don't need your process, avoid processed food. You don't need foods cooked with it. So when you're cooking at home, stick to the stable fats that I just mentioned. Again, I'll be linking to these some of these studies and articles in the show notes. You will learn more about it. Another great resource is the it's a book called The Whole Soy Story. Stumbled on that. Whole Soy Story by Kayla Daniels. Great resource on soy in general. The whole story, actually, as in the title. So start choosing your fats wisely. Have a great week.